Hey, thanks so much for joining us here on 90s Plus. I'm meteorologist Bianchi, and it's that time of year to look ahead at the fall colors, what it might look like, when those peak dates might be, and also maybe a bit of an overall outlook in terms of how those fall colors might end up looking. Now, from a broad perspective, before we kind of get into some of those maps that we're going to show you here, I think it's really important to note, and maybe a big misconception about fall colors, is that the weather, climate has, I think there's a bit of a misperception about how big of an influence the climate has on it. Because remember, the reason that the leaves change their colors and the overall kind of broad process of it, it has to do with the amount of sunlight that they're seeing per day, or that they're feeling, essentially. So, for example, when a leaf or a tree is getting 15 hours of sunlight a day, that is the instinctual reason for those leaves to create photosynthesis, which turns them green, and then it's that lack of sunlight that ultimately turns them yellow and red and eventually allows those leaves to fall on off. So remember, it's the sunlight. It's not necessarily, it's not like leaves have thermometers on them and are cued to fall off when it drops below 50 degrees, for example, or when they feel necessarily a snowflake. It's, again, it is sunlight. That is what matters first and foremost. So kind of want to explain that before we get into everything else, because that is what leads to this. I was speaking about this with my colleague meteorologist Corey Reppenhagen. The dates of fall foliage, they rarely vary by more than, say, 3 or 4 days. So when we're talking about these peak aspen colors, this is a pretty good timeline. And there are certainly impacts from climate, from weather. We'll get into those. But when we're talking about those peak dates, the ones that you're looking at here on your screen, these are going to be, I mean, without much of a shadow of a doubt. Again, in the maybe most extreme scenario, this might be altered by 2 or 3 days. But, you know, maybe in a weird year, it might start, say, September 13th or 14th in the northern mountains for the peak, and in other years maybe it's a little bit later. But again, these dates, you can basically take them to the bank. Again, here in Colorado, the aspen leaves, which are the so famous ones for those fall colors, they rarely vary by more than a couple of days. They're very, very consistent on the East Coast. The maples and a lot of those trees out there, they can be a bit more variable. But when we're talking about the aspen trees here in the mountains, these dates are pretty much ironclad, or about as ironclad as can be. Again, there is always some variation, but it's not more than a couple of days. So when we're talking about the northern mountains, those peak dates tend to be in the middle to end part of September. Usually the third, fourth week of September is a good bet. The central mountains, especially once you start getting south of I-70 and getting into the West Elks, the Sawatch, the Collegiate Peaks, even the wet mountains, those peak dates tend to be more maybe the first weekend of October, last weekend of September. And then once you're getting into the San Juans, the Sangre de Cristos, as well as on east into, I should say really the wet mountains out there as well, those peak dates tend to be the first or second week of the month of October. So again, that first, second week of October is often the peak for those mountains, the further south you go. But it varies from north to south. And again, that has to do with the amount of sunlight that those leaves are receiving. It is not due to the climate, it's not due to the temperature, it is due to the climate. So with that said, in terms of the overall outlook for things, I would say that most of the state and most of the leaves near us here in Colorado, we're probably looking at a near average season in terms of color, in terms of the length of the peak. Now, going back to this previous map for a quick second, the exact length of the peak, that can vary based on the climate. So if we're in a drought, for example, the peak of those fall leaves, that can be reduced to, say, 9 or 10 days, as opposed to maybe closer to 2 weeks when we've got a better precipitation season. So that's why going over to this, why I think the southwestern mountains, we might have a bit of a shorter peak because it's been a very dry summer for our friends in the San Juans and the Sangre de Cristos. And this is the part of the state that just hasn't seen a whole lot of monsoonal moisture, and that's why I think we may see just, I'm a little timid to say even diminished. You're still going to get a great show out there in the San Juan. So don't cancel those trips. Don't adjust your plans because of this orange color that I'm putting there in the southwestern mountains. It just means that you may get, I don't know, again, 10, 11 days of peak as opposed to 13, 14 days. So that's what we're talking about. The differences are going to be pretty minor. Most of you will not notice it. Overall, again, we should have a decent show and a decent amount of fall colors. And we'll get into some of those near-term weather things that we look for, but overall, I would say from a long-term perspective, I think we're going to have a pretty decent season for us along the north of I-70 and a lot of the near mountains. That's where we've obviously had a lot of rain, a lot of snow, and we've had fairly cool nights of late as well, and that will all contribute to making it a fairly nice season for us, I think, in terms of those fall colors along the north of I-70 as well as down to the near mountains. Now, precipitation so far this year, those red colors, and those pinks, that's indicating we've just had a ton of water, and these are precipitation anomalies. So the green, that's where we're a little drier than average. So that's the kind of main thing we're watching for, is the amount of moisture, because again, that's what the trees use as nutrition. And as you've got less nutrition, obviously the fall leaves may have a shorter peak. But again, in terms of the overall colors and overall things that we look for, I think we're looking at a fairly decent season overall. A couple of other things I want to explain on camera here as we kind of run things on it. So again, maybe some of those misperceptions about the fall colors, that I think people think that weather and climate have more to do with the fall colors than they actually do. That said, when it comes to those impacts from weather and climate, it tends to be highest in the near term. So it's really the last week of August and the first week or two of September. The weather then is the most important factor. What we look for, and I'm basing this off of interviews with arborists as well as meteorologist Corey Reppenhagen, who's done a lot of interviews with arborists over the years about how this works. When we get cool nights and warm days, so ideally what you're looking for in the last week of August and the first and second week of September, you're looking for cool days, cool nights with low temperatures in the 30s and highs in the 60s, maybe low 70s. So not too hot, not too cold. You don't want those temperatures to drop down into the teens and 20s. That starts to freeze off those trees a little bit early and kind of reduces the peak. But you want it to be nice and cool and kind of crisp at night. And you want about average precipitation as well. So you probably want a rainy stretch at some point in there, or a storm or two in there to kind of keep those trees fairly replenished in terms of precipitation and moisture as well. Again, that's the nutrition those trees thrive off of. So again, top line takeaways. Along north of I-70, pretty good season, probably shaping on up. That will depend, again, based on what we see here in the end of August and the beginning of September in terms of that weather. And we're looking for about average precipitation, not too much, not too little. And we want also those cool nights and warm but not too hot days. So again, 60s, 70s during the day, 30s at night, and you couple that with near average precipitation, we should have a pretty good show for us into the high country, maybe a slightly longer peak than usual along the north of I-70. And then you get into the San Juans. I'm, again, a little timid to say this, but you want we may be looking at a slightly diminished peak or a shorter peak for us in the San Juan Mountains and the Sangre de Cristos. Again, that is just owing to a very dry summer out that way. We obviously had a very good winter, so I don't think that's going to really affect things all that much, if at all. But I would just maybe look out for maybe a slightly shorter peak in there. But still, again, if you're planning on making the trip to the San Juans in mid-October, or to the Yampa Valley in mid-September, mid to late September for that peak fall color, I think you're going to get a great show wherever you go in the state, just based off those maps I was just showing you in terms of the timing, because the timing of that is often pretty pinpoint. I'm not saying that to brag. That's not me doing it. That's Mother Nature and the aspen trees that are very, very predictable when it comes to when those peak fall colors will show. So hopefully it gives you a good idea about what to expect as we head into the peak fall color season. Once again, I'm 9 News meteorologist Chris Bianchi. Thanks for joining us here on 9 News Plus.